Welcome back to the Scaling Tech Podcast, the podcast for leaders of software engineering teams. I'm your host, Arin Saib. In today's episode, we're going to speak with Aviv Ben-Yosef, a technology executive consultant and author, about how engineering leaders can drastically grow the impact that their engineers have. Aviv shares a lot of great insights with us about how to make sure your teams are not just feature factories. Instead, it's our job as engineering managers to make sure that our teams are making innovation habitual and contributing dramatically to the organization's strategy. So join me today for this discussion with Aviv and learn how to lead teams that are better than average.
Welcome to the Scaling Tech Podcast, where we help you manage your growing engineering team. Through expert interviews, we help you navigate the challenges of leading, hiring, growing, and nurturing your tech team to deliver the value your customers demand. Brought to you by agilityfeet.com, experts in staffing engineering teams in Latin America for clients globally.
Aviv Ben-Yosef is a tech executive consultant who helps executives triple their impact per engineer. He publishes the Tech Executive Podcast, which contains short tips on creating high-performant autonomous teams. Aviv is also author of the Tech Executive Operating System and Capitalizing Your Technology. Welcome to the Scaling Tech Podcast, Aviv.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I want to start out with I think a really powerful statement that you made in your book. You said that life is too short to lead an average team. So tell us a little more about that. And what's the first thing you see in a team that makes you lament, wow, this team is really average?
Well, I have seen a bunch of teams that are average, but I'll be frank, I've been lucky enough that most of the teams I work with had people who, themselves individually weren't average, or the majority were above average, and yet the team was delivering at an average or even lower capacity. And that's what pains me the most. If someone is average but working to maximize their own potential, I cannot ask them for anything more. So if I'm seeing a team that has a bunch of junior people who are delivering what a solid junior engineer should deliver, I'm okay with that. But I saw repeatedly teams where you had people who were stellar, brilliant people, and yet the team didn't even make a dent in the business. They were moving slowly, or they were delivering things that didn't really matter. And that's what always pained me. I'm looking at people wasting their best years and wasting their talents. And that's how I got into this. When I was 19, 18, and I had my first software engineering work professionally, which was in the Israeli equivalent of the NSA. And we had some people come in, reservists, after years and years, like 20 years after they finished their service. And they said, you guys don't know it yet, but this is the best it's going to get. You're here with a bunch of geniuses. And, they said it positively, as an enjoy where you are. And I'm looking at it and listening, and I'm like, what am I? This is the peak. I'm 19 and it's all downhill from there. No way. That can't be the case. And that set me off on this trajectory of how do we get that? It was an amazing organization back then. Wasn't perfect, I'll tell you that. I think we all saw some signs of that recently. And yet, I do believe that it can be done in other places, and not just when you just pick the best 1% of that year because you're entitled to by law. And that's what I'm trying to do.
That example you gave of a that pains you more, of as I understood you, a high performing engineer who's maybe not working up to their capability, or their team as a whole is not working up to their capability, and so they're not delivering things that are valuable to the customers. That made me cringe when I heard you say it. That definitely sounds painful. When you run into a scenario like that, who's to blame? Is that a matter of that individual engineer not reaching their potential? Is it a matter of the team leadership, the corporate culture? What do you see?
All of the above. I always say that we have a lot of agency. So even if you're a sole engineer and you're looking at your management and things look grim, I still believe that you have a lot more power than you think. It's a bit Zen-like, and I try not to sound like a Zen monk. And yet I do believe that it all starts with yourself. And I used to have, like 15 years ago, I had a long row of articles all about, I called it the autonomous score of you yourself working to make yourself agile, working to make yourself better, working to make yourself shine and learn and continuously improve all on your own. And even if everything around you looks like it's not going to go well, if you do that, then you're working on your own software craftsmanship and you get better. And that's something that I find infectious positively, because that's the sort of thing that I want to see go viral. And yet, of course, a lot of times we have management that's not really management. I saw so many engineers being thrust into management positions without ever learning what does it even mean to be a manager. Is it just, getting
Right.
the new title on LinkedIn and you're done, or do you actually have to learn, gasp, a new profession? Or executives who don't know what being an executive is. So all of those things are things that you have to work on in order to create as a whole an organization that can really maximize its potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your use of the word agency in there a couple of times, really important term, I think. Um, and so kind of imagining still that, because now it's embedded in my mind, that painful example of an talented individual and a talented team not living up to their capability. Uh, if I guess the first, times that the developer, let's say that talented developer raises an issue, that's a good example of agency on their part, right? They recognize a problem, they want to solve it. Maybe they're presenting a solution. Those are things I definitely look for in people that are good or, above average, that they're not just presenting you with a problem, they're also coming up with ideas and solutions to bounce off you, right? They're bringing something to that. That's a good example, I think, of someone feeling a sense of agency. But if their leadership, if the team management doesn't respond to that in a positive way that kind of builds up that sense of agency, eventually they're going to stop, right? There's a point where they're going to say, you know what, nobody listens to me. My opinion's irrelevant. So I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to stop putting my neck out on the line, so to speak, right? So how do you approach that? How do you know, like, if you come into a team not at the beginning, how do you know, okay, this is an issue with the leadership has not given this team any agency, or this is a team that's underachieving themselves and not speaking up when they do have the agency? How do you? That's a really hard thing to assess. I feel like. How do you
Yeah,
approach that?
it's not something you can find very easily, at least at first. And usually, when I start working with organizations, it depends on what they know they need. I sometimes do all these sorts of assessments. Sometimes I do the fly on the wall or the fly on the Zoom, where I try and see how they communicate between themselves. How does the daily stand up look? Or I look at some of their PRs to see the commenting. I look at a retro and see if the retro is actually a retrospective where people are learning stuff, they are voicing ideas and issues and action items, or is it just a way to, burn another 30 minutes every couple of weeks? And which is something I see all too often. But I think that at the end of it, what I do the most is I sit down with the different people in the team. And again, I'm lucky enough that usually when people call me, it means that people aren't below average when it comes to their own potential, and people want to get better. And therefore, if I sit down with them and I talk to them and I'm like, what's holding you back? What should management do? If you are a CEO for a day, what would you change? And ask that enough people in the organization, and you start to see patterns. And sometimes what the engineers say is what they think is right, and that's not the real solution, but it helps me pinpoint where I should be digging some more. So maybe they're pointing at symptoms, but that gives me the lead, the thread to pull on, so I can find the actual root cause. And that's something that we do. And you know how it works. It's whack-a-mole sometimes, because you improve in one point and you realize, oh, now the bottleneck is over there. So it's a
Right.
process always. And yet I do think that every time that we do it, if we do it often enough, and for me, it's addictive. Once we start doing this and we start seeing the improvements, it's something that I genuinely believe you can just get better at as a muscle, as the entire organization together learns how to operate more and more productively and effectively. But I won't lie, sometimes we see that, I might be working with a leader and realize that that leader has reached a ceiling in the organization, as in above them, the people managing them don't want to think in an agile way, or don't want or don't believe in real delegation and real autonomy. And if you reach that, the best people, the A players, A plus players, end up leaving. And I think that's fine, because again, that sort of an organization probably doesn't want A players or too many of those in the room, because that's not the style of management they want. If the executive team is open to changing and wants to work on that, that's amazing, and we can work wonders with time. But if not, progress, get as much as you can, help as much as you can to the organization. But if you see that you no longer match, that's fine. The c'est la vie.
Yeah, I love how you called out stand-ups as one way to look for those indicators in a team quickly. I always think of that too as a really quick kind of way to see red flags in a team. Back when I used to be an agile coach, and you could very quickly see, are people in the stand-up, are they talking to each other? Are they focused on collaboration and coordination, which is what the stand-up's really supposed to be about? Or are they all turning to face the most powerful person in the room and giving them a status update, which is
Exactly.
not what an agile stand-up is supposed to be about, right? So yeah, things like that, you can sometimes get a really quick indicator. And I like your point too about attrition of your A players, right? That's a very good indicator that there's something off, and they feel like they're not being listened to, or they don't have that agency. I want to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, WebRTC Ventures. At WebRTC Ventures, our teams are experts in building live video into your web or mobile applications. We've literally built hundreds of them. We have over a decade of experience using both open source and commercial media servers in a wide range of industries, including telehealth, edtech, broadcasting, and more. We also publish a lot of helpful tips and industry interviews on our website and our YouTube channel. So be sure to check out webrtc.ventures, and we can help you build, scale, and deploy your video solution. So you spoke briefly about getting your start at 19 and working in intelligence services, and that opening your eyes to the importance of strong teams. And tell us a little bit more about your background and your journey to where you are now.
Sure. So I started coding, I think, around when I was 9 years old, just because for some reason I really got attracted to the idea of making the computer do what I told it to do. And that became like a really, really deep rabbit hole that I kept falling into for the entirety of my teenage years. And I did the whole thing, learning how to code in several languages, finding open source code, because I come from a small town in Israel, and I didn't know anyone face to face who knew how to code for real. When I was a teenager, I never met anyone, so I found people online like IRC, and I found open source projects and worked on those. And I remember that at one point I wanted to learn how to hack systems, because I thought, if you know that, you can fix them later. That's the ultimate sign that you understand how things work, when you can break into them, when you understand how to break them, etc. That's like 16-year-old way of thinking, but that's what it was. But I'm also a nerd, so I didn't want to get into any trouble. As an Israeli nerd, a teenager, like, what should I do? What should I do? I'm like, oh, I know. If I test what I'm learning on Iranian servers, no one's going to extradite me to Iran. I mean, that's going to be fine. So that's what I did. I used to hack into Iran, .gov.ir servers. I didn't do anything. But once I actually got into them, I'm like, okay, now I know how to do that. And I backed out. I also don't speak Farsi. And then when it's compulsory to enlist to the IDF at 18 here. So when that started, I remember being really, really on edge, because I'm like, for classification, they ask you, what did you do, etc. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna say this, and no one's gonna let me go to that unit. I'm probably gonna be in a tank or something for 3 years. And then I tell that to the girl doing the classification, and she's like, oh yeah, sure, she has a form ready for that. Apparently they're looking for us. She's like, okay, just sign that you're not going to do anything illegal from now on. Like, okay, sure. And that's it, and boom. So I did that a few good years. It was very, very intense and very, very interesting. I did a lot of things that I'm still amazed you are able to do, with a bunch of teenagers, that other organizations like the NSA has dozens and dozens of PhDs doing. So it taught me how to be thrifty and move things fast. And I really, really got hooked on that feeling of delivering value really fast. And then I went and worked at IBM for a year, learned that's not fun. And from then on, I was always in startups. I was a first employee of a startup. I then did a bunch of freelancing as an engineer and then hands on helped about a dozen unicorns and big companies. And from that, I did CTO as a service work. Now everyone calls it fractional work. And after a few years, I decided I didn't want to be the expensive band aid that you have a fractional CTO when you don't have a tech leader. No, I want to help those tech leaders get better. So I transitioned into what I'm doing nowadays, which is helping those tech executives get better, lead a team worth leading. And that means helping themselves become those managers, as we talked about, and helping their organization maximize their potential.
Yeah, you've seen quite a range of experiences then, going from an IBM type of world to the startup world, and I remember you mentioning in your book too. One little aside talking about working in a startup that was overworking its team, and if I recall correctly, it led to a point where you kind of like half fell asleep on the drive home and realized this is not healthy. This is too much. So, there's a big range there. And sometimes when people talk about, well, let's triple our impact per engineer, and the phrasing used, that, a traditional manager might think that let's get them to work overtime. I've worked in startups like that. They would bring us in dinner, and I put on a lot of weight because I ate a lot of free, unhealthy meals in that job. And I did learn a tremendous amount, and we got a lot done as a company, but it was completely unsustainable, right? Completely unhealthy to me individually, as well as the company as a whole. That company doesn't exist anymore, right? They fell apart. So I think there's a big challenge there in being able to navigate that middle ground, right? You don't want to be so slow and bureaucratic that you don't feel like you're ever getting anything done, but you want to have that agency that people have and often seek at by working at a startup, but without that, horrible lifestyle that often goes with it and the overworking. So I imagine that's a pretty challenging part of what you have to mentor those rising engineering leaders on. But what do you see as one of the more challenging aspects of working with them?
Yeah, I can say that for me, that story you refer to is something that I really took to heart. And what I saw afterwards, when I started doing freelancing, there was a period where I used to work 2 days a week for different startups as one of their engineers. I would help them deliver code really, really fast. And I remember hearing not once and not twice from VPs of engineering who were employing me that I was delivering in those 2 days a week more than most of their engineers deliver full time. Now, I was pretty good, okay, but I wasn't, I don't think, 3 times as good when it comes to how fast I can type, etc. And that wasn't it. Tripling impact per engineer doesn't mean clicking really, really fast. It means that every line of code you actually write, or the majority of them, actually matter. And we find a way to drive towards impact as fast as possible. And I think that's the agile core. Back in the day, like 14 years ago, when Twitter was still a nice thing, I remember tweeting about this, that at the end of it, if you just ask yourself, why am I doing this often enough, you're going to be doing well. And I remember like 4 different Agile Manifesto authors, signatories, replied and said yes. I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what people need to be doing. And that set me off to just focus on that. So, for example, I was working with those startups and they told me, yeah, 2 days a week and you're delivering more. And again, it's nice for the ego, but I'm looking at everyone around me and I'm like, what are they doing then the entire week?
Right.
And I learned that there are a few things that I was doing that aren't magic, but just important. So one of them was keep on asking why. And I'm teaching everyone around, when you're lower level, ask why. Israelis are good. We have a word for it. We say chutzpah, but it's not. And chutzpah, if you literally translate, it means like being a bit rude. But it's not about being rude and asking your boss, why do you want me to do this? It's about understanding why am I doing this?
Right.
And it's about teaching the people that it's fine to ask, and it's about teaching managers that if people ask, it's not a bad thing. It's about them actually being so interested and wanting to make sure they know what to do that they are asking. Because the thing I hate the most is those who go, sir, yes, sir, and just go off coding. No, I want those
Right.
questions. So it's about enabling that. I call it injecting chutzpah into your organization, especially when it's needed. And also, well, back then, what I later realized I had is the fact that when you're working as an hourly billing sort of freelancer, people actually value your time, because as opposed to a full-time employee, they're like, we don't want to waste their time. Hundreds of dollars spent on every hour. We want to make sure that whatever he's doing is good. And all of a sudden, people would tell me, you don't need to be in that meeting. It's not that important. Or the product people would actually come and prepare with me more what we need to be doing, or explain to me more so I can get things done faster. And then I would sit with the VPs and I told them, partly this is okay. I'm a good engineer, but look, if you only had that same operating system for everyone and not just for the person who's expensive, think what you could accomplish. Let's do
Right.
that. So maybe if a meeting is not important, it's not important for the rest of the team. Or why
Right.
do we even have it? Why it could have been an email, that sort of stuff. So I started picking up on those patterns and started massaging those into the heads of the people I was working in.
I like that. I especially like the stress that you put on working on things that are valuable, right? Because if you may have produced the same number of lines of code as one of those less effective engineers in the same time period, but if you're working on more valuable things, that's going to have more impact. It's going to make you look more productive, even if we use kind of a garbage metric, to be clear, like lines of code produced. It doesn't matter if it's not valuable code. So let's talk about interesting concept that you talk about in capitalizing your technology, and I want to understand better the difference between tech debt and tech capital. So maybe give us a couple of your definitions for those, and talk about how you move something from being a liability like a tech debt, make it into an asset to that organization.
So, okay, tech debt. I'm guessing anyone who has been professionally doing code knows we're spending way too much on it. Every day we're saying, "Oh yeah, that's tech debt. This is tech debt. We need time working on the tech debt." And I constantly see people having fights with the product team to get more tech debt time and whatever. Okay, it exists. I agree, but I do think that we've gotten to a point where we call anything that's not pure new features tech debt, which that's not the case. And also, because we frame it like that, we go into a weird situation with the product team, because they oftentimes don't prioritize tech debt. It's like, no, we want 20% or 30% of our time to work on tech debt and then do whatever you want to do there. And I think that that's just not a healthy way of managing our time, especially because time budget, as with any other budget, once you get those 20-30%, no one's ever going to give it back. I've never seen an engineer say, oh, this tech debt issue, I don't think it's that important. Maybe you can just not do it and give me a new feature. Usually they'll just start geeking out and make things better and refactor it some more, because that's our craft, and I get that. But that's not really delivering value. So for me, I started thinking about it and realized that what I was trying to create more in companies is not the tech debt focus, like, your friend that's, I don't know, skipping every coffee outside to save another $2 a few times a day, because there's a clear limit to how much I can save there, right? At the end of the day, I'm not drinking any coffee and I saved a few bucks. But what about the concept of creating value? As an engineer, you can't usually create value out of nowhere, because if you don't have features from product that they know the users need, it's not like you can create them all on your own. Yet we're smart, but there is the product management profession, because it's needed. You need people to actually come up with this. So from time to time, you might have good ideas, but this tech capital is not about replacing product. Tech capital is about saying, okay, I'm an engineer. I understand things. I have this capability of making the computer listen to me. How can I do that, not just for the company's users benefit, as in the feature work, but what else can I do? And that's how I came up with framing the concept of tech capital, which is about technology that we write that gives the company more and more value. Features aren't tech capital, because features is like whenever you develop a new feature, it's like buying a car. It gives you some value, but it starts decreasing in its value immediately. It's not something that actually gives you more and more value once you have it. And tech capital would be, for example, creating internal technology that makes things better. One thing engineers really understand, the type of tech capital that we see all the time, and sometimes people call it tech debt, is about working on engineering velocity, like making your continuous integration system faster, making the tests not fail. That's about creating tech capital that makes the engineers work faster and more reliably. Amazing. Now let's apply that to other areas. For example, one of the best things I've ever seen was a company where they had a small sales force that actually went into different neighborhoods in the US to sell the software to them. And an engineer happened to see what the salespeople were doing and said, I think I can actually make this a bit better for you, because the way they were deciding where to go wasn't all that smart. And that engineer went off, took some open government data, and etc., and created a Google Map overlay that actually ranked the neighborhoods in their area of interest according to all the different types of metrics. So all of a sudden, it's clustered, and you can see not building by building, should I go there, but you actually saw, oh, this is red, this is yellow. Maybe I should go to the red area first. And the salespeople had the, that GIF of the mind exploding of the person who's looking at something. The jaw is dropping, and you don't understand, how is that even possible? So the engineer did that in like half a day, just tinkering with something because he had an idea, and all of a sudden the salespeople just got twice, if not more, out of every day. And this is tech capital, creating these small bits of software to make others faster, better, giving your peers in the company small superpowers. And this is something that I like. And we see it when you work on marketing automation to help your marketing peers be able to create email campaigns without having to nag an engineer, or run a few experiments without having to wait for a deployment. I see it when we help customer success not be reliant on engineers because, oh, what does it mean when we have that exception? Or can you tell me what that log is? Or can you help me reset that system? Let's give them the tools so they internally can do things better. And when we allow engineers to do that, especially, and a lot of the times I just need to talk about it like I'm doing right now so people become aware of it. I'm just priming their brain to realize, oh yeah, that's possible. I can write code not just for users but for everyone. And once we start talking about it, people start noticing that this is something that I can do, and they see someone else in the company having issues and they can help them. And now with AI and with the low code no code tools that are popping up everywhere, it just becomes so much easier. We can do these little things and help everyone get so much faster. So I love it. I love seeing someone connect a few things with Zapier, or maybe getting some OpenAI API going on to help make customer success answer things faster. And it's really patchy at first, but that's how tech capital starts. You do these little investments, you do a bit of this, a bit of that. And when people in the company actually see value, maybe you say, okay, now that we see that it's delivering so much value that we actually want to productize it. We actually have someone from product, for example, think about how do we make it better? How do we actually make those people in the organization better? Again, I'm hooked. Whenever I see people getting impact, it just gives me this boost of motivation and energy. And whenever we start doing those in companies, you don't just get the productivity benefit of others in the company being more productive. You also get this motivation for the engineers because all of a sudden others in the company view them as people who can help them. And engineers are no longer people who never talk to anyone else, because it's not just I'm getting my orders from product and I'm doing that. All of a sudden some of your clients are people in sales or in marketing, and you're talking to them and understanding their work to help them. So it's really, we have so many layers of benefits here once you get this rolling, and I'm in love with it. Whenever I see it happening, I'm hooked. And I started, after releasing this concept in both of my books, I started getting emails from people, all over the world saying, oh, by the way, we've started doing that and it's amazing. Thank you. So I'm like, okay, this is actually something that you, dear listener, can do right now without having to pay a lot of money to work with someone like me. Just think about this and find the opportunities, and you're going to see so much benefit. And your engineers are going to be so much happier. The product people are going to see that the engineers don't just want to polish a certain piece of code till it looks amazing. You want to drive value, and that conversation is something that everyone enjoys doing. So yeah,
Yeah, I
sorry,
love that.
that was a long answer. Sorry.
No, but it was a very good answer, definitely. And I think it's much more motivational to talk about things in terms of that capital, that tech capital, the value that they provide to the organization, and kind of restate a couple of things I heard you say. This could be about improving your own like DevOps processes for the purpose of your engineering team. This could be like Zapier automations you mentioned, helping someone in marketing be able to automate part of their work and make it more self-serve for them so that, internal efficiencies are improved across teams. And sometimes it could lead to a whole new product line too. Maybe an extreme example of that is the whole existence of AWS, right? They started building cloud computing for their own shopping cart for Amazon's e-commerce business, and then realized this is something that we can productize and provides efficiencies to others and creates business value and all that sort of thing. So a lot of different
Spot on.
ways, that you could look at this. I really like it. It is I think the framing of it is important, and it just is, again, more motivational than having like a product owner just say, okay, team, you get 20% of your time to do whatever that engineering stuff it is that keeps you motivated so that you can go work on my stuff that's more
Mhm.
boring to you, whatever. Like that's no way to live. That doesn't sound fun,
Exactly.
right? And But I guess from an engineer's perspective, one of the benefits of that phrasing of it is that they do have complete sort of control over what they work with in that tech debt portion of their sprint, for example. So when we talk about it more as tech capital, we are working on things that are providing more value to the organization, hopefully. I guess, does that also bring that product owner type of role more into the equation, that they get to now, do they have the final say with that engineer of saying, okay, I understand you're calling this tech capital. Sounds cool. I like the idea of it, but I really need you to work on this other thing first, and we'll get to that later. Like, how does that sort of autonomy in what the engineering team gets to work on affected by that?
I think that we need to really understand what is the non-feature work that you have in your team, and sometimes it's really, we call it tech debt, but renewing certificates or having to replace something because the library we're using is now obsolete and has security issues and we have to upgrade it. Those are things that aren't feature work, but I think if you explain that to your product peer, they can understand it and they can help prioritize it. You don't have to just shove it along in your 20% allocated tech debt time, because this is something that's important for the company. Plainly, you can make the case for why this is important and let the product person look at it and consider the risks, consider the urgency, and decide when it needs to be done. And I like that. But sometimes we do have things that are real tech debt. We wrote something in a way that's horrible and we need to improve that. If it's very small or something that we can do along the way, you don't need to tell anyone. It's like, I don't ask for time to rename a method. I just do it. And
Right.
I believe that we need to be able to do that along the way, as long as, we're talking about, let's say 10% of the time of the task, not doubling the time it takes just because I want to make it prettier. And if we're talking about anything more significant, then when you have good tech leadership and good product leadership, you should be able to talk about this and actually prioritize it, because you see the value, you see that it's an area of the code that's actually getting used a lot, and not just because we feel like doing it. However, there is something important here, and that is a lot of the tech capital that we do is risky because we might be doing something that someone has an idea for, but we don't know if it's really going to work, or even if it's going to work, if people are going to use it internally. And I started seeing that instead of taking the 20% of your time, I tried to go for all the time regularly is time that we prioritize with our product peers, because we actually talk about the importance of everything that we're doing as we're going along, because we need to do the keep the lights on work, because we know that upgrading that or fixing that are things that we need to prioritize, just like fixing bugs, for example. But to allow people to have the real innovative, risky stuff, we do have what I call intermissions. Some companies call them innovation weeks, sabbaticals, whatever you want to call them. And how often you do that depends on your situation and on your company. Some people do it once a quarter, some do it every 2 months, some once every 6 months. But this is essentially taking that chunk of time where you can really be autonomous, where you can really think and do things on your own. And I hate doing that on a task by task basis for one task out of every sprint or something like that, because it feels to me like it does require you to change gears in your head. And even the hackathons that so many companies are doing, I feel like those make no sense, because you only have like 24 hours, 36 hours. That's not enough time to actually do anything worthwhile. And usually by the time the hackathon is done, you don't even remember what you did. It doesn't work, and you forget about it the following day. I went for these intermissions with companies I worked with, where we had a week of everyone working together and start and trying. The goal was to do innovative things that, if they work, would have a positive ROI. So it's not just doing things because I feel like doing them. It's because I can make a case internally for my peers in engineering, not for product people. I think this could be interesting. I want to be doing that. And once you do that, all of a sudden you have this week that, now we go back to how we started this. People are really maximizing their potential. They're giving it their all, because now they understand that this is a week where I can fail. During sprints, I rather not fail, right? I rather deliver on time. But here, we're doing things that are innovative, that are novel, and sometimes they succeed, sometimes not. But we learn, we get better, and this is a bit like having your own internal VC, venture capital firm, because you have this portfolio of experiments, and when they work, it really pays off. And that's what I like seeing, and people get hooked on that. And once we do that a few times, you start seeing people from marketing or someone from sales go to an engineer and start pitching them ideas, because they understand, oh, this is something that goes on, so I might as well try and lead them where I want them to go, or show them something that I think is valuable, or an issue we're having. And this, again, this is the the holy grail for me, when you see the entire company starting to talk and you have no silos. But even if you just start with those innovation weeks once a quarter, and you let people and ask them to really be innovative and try and do things that are pushing it a bit, you're going to see amazing things, and you're going to see the benefit of the motivation that you see from letting people tinker 20% of the time. But now it's distilled to things that actually matter, and it's distilled to things that make the entire organization better, because we're doing innovative things. If they work out, you're getting a bunch. And I remember having to sell this to a CEO in a startup, and it wasn't easy. He's like, a week of them just doing things that they think are interesting. And we did that, and right in that first time, I remember him coming back to me and saying, oh my god, this is a bonanza. They just unlocked something that made us so much faster. They just paid off, in quotes, for the rest of the intermissions a year into the future. I'm like, okay, this is exactly what we want. So we're trying to do that.
I think that's great. The concept of innovation sprints, intermissions, really powerful, and building a cadence in for that. I think that is a big step in changing the mentality of a company, and an approach from thinking of hackathons as being the only place you innovate. I like that a lot, and I also really like. It sounded like a good health indicator to me when you described like somebody from marketing coming in and starting to pitch ideas to the team. Basically, it's kind of like a health indicator of an innovative culture in that organization that they can do that. We're starting to run towards the end of our time, and there's so much that we can talk about for sure. I want to make sure, though, maybe in a little bit of the time we have left, to dive down a little bit more into something that you refer to as feature factories and some negative behavior there. So, what's the role of the engineering leader in influencing like corporate strategy in general and making sure that their teams don't just become a feature factory or viewed that way?
Yeah, so I think that if you're an engineering leader, the CTO or the VP of engineering, whatever, you owe it to your organization and you owe it to the company to ensure that engineering doesn't become a cost center when we just look at it as something that we give them a bunch of product specs and we want to see the features go out the other end, because then you might as well be outsourcing. I want to see something that's integrated. Partly all the things we just talked about. As you said, good health indicators are where people are actually working together across the entire company. That's one. And second, as a tech executive, I want you to help your company understand that what you're leading is an innovation center and make sure that what you're doing is profitable. So, whenever people have to do layoffs, I hope your organization is going to get spared. And maybe if you do it good enough, you're not even going to get into layoffs. And to do that, for example, as a VP of engineering, you want to ensure that your people are doing what's important, which we just talked about, the ideas, for example, and not doing tech debt ad infinitum. We want to make sure that they talk to their peers so that they understand what's important and find even new opportunities to deliver value. And third, when I talk about profitable engineering, it's how do we ensure that the features we're doing and the work that we're doing and the organization I'm building as a tech executive are all towards being a profitable, healthy organization. So, for example, I want to make sure that I don't have to keep doubling my organization whenever we double the amount of clients we have, because that's not healthy enough. I want to make sure that we are driving towards very low margin per each additional user. And that means not allowing anything that's like professional services going on, or ensuring that, for example, if you have any SaaS system, you don't allow for all sorts of draconian contracts where you can't upgrade that client before you ask them, and they have months and you have to support like 10 different versions into the past and that sort of stuff, because then the matrix of support means you're going to have so many engineers just moving those bits instead of delivering value. And I hate that. So sometimes this is all about helping the tech executive learn how to be an executive and cooperate with the CRO or with whoever is doing the sales and helping the company strategy. So we create a product that actually utilizes the concept of low margin software, as opposed to building something that, as we've all seen, might look good at first, might have a few nice startup funding rounds, but eventually it just goes downhill because it's not a real business. So this is something that's very important. And if you're a tech executive listening, realize that we just said tech executive. You have the tech part nailed down. You have to also be a genuine executive.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. And we were definitely past the era of the startup world where you can just build shiny things and get a lot of funding for it and not worry about being a real business. It is incredibly important and should have always been to build an actual profitable, sustainable business around your idea. But for the tech executive, for those engineering leaders to make sure that their organization is contributing to that, providing innovation that improves the tech capital in that organization. Yeah, a lot of great tips that you've shared with us today. Really appreciate it. So, Aviv Ben-Yosef, how can our listeners get in touch with you for more information, and where can they buy a copy of one of your books?
Sure. So if you go to avivbenyosef.com, you can find my podcast, my articles, my newsletter that goes out every week, and also links to both of my books, which you can also find on Amazon, because that's the only place I buy books.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope that all of our listeners enjoyed hearing this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with you, and that at the end of this, they also come away agreeing that life is too short to lead an average team. So thanks for sharing
Amen.
your expertise with us, Aviv.
Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of the thousands of developers we've placed with our clients, I want to briefly tell you about our sponsor, Agility Feed. Agility Feed has been building nearshore agile teams for U.S. companies since 2010. We were an early pioneer in doing this sort of developer staffing. Our team can help you recruit talented software engineers and technical teams in Latin America. We'll handle all aspects of recruiting, contracting, and payments for you so you can focus on delivering great software. To learn more, check us out at agilityfeed.com. That's agilityfeat.com.